Hey folks, this is Tolly and welcome to another dev stream. This one's going to be more focused on coding. I'm going to be working through a problem that honestly I've been stuck on for a couple weeks. I'm not sure how interesting this one will be, but it looks like we're live everywhere, so I'm just going to get started. Okay. This one, compared to the stream last evening where we were focusing on more like level design stuff and placing things, this is going to be more technical. So what's the problem? Okay, so this is Era of Embers, the JRPG, and we have this kind of skill screen set up. We're gonna reload. Looks like things broke while I was getting stream set up. But we have this skill screen that is functional in this version of the game. But in the new kind of world of infinite retries, it does not work. So if we come in here, we can like upgrade a couple of different perks. We can see that when we pick up like health increases isn't going to do it, but the strength one, if we do that, then our like attack value goes up. So then the names aren't the same, but there's stat increases. And I also purchased this unlock flame stab, and now when we go to this previous screen, we can go into the flame stabs skill screen and we can start unlocking skills in that one as well. So I really like this system. I want to grab it from this previous project and bring it forward into infinite retries. Since we last looked at stuff, since the last time we really streamed a lot of code, I've kind of broken up the engine into two spaces. There's like core, which has like a lot of our like common systems like RPGs, saves, screens, our sequences, singleton, state managers, the tile map. All of this stuff is generic and could be used across multiple projects. And then we get into like the actual like content and scripts for infinite retries and the content and scripts for the JRPG, aka Era of Embers. And so all of the skill screen stuff, when I first broke this out, got moved into core. And I had it so infinite retries and the JRPG were both using the same scripts. But as I started building out the systems for infinite retries, what I found was its skill system doesn't want to be the same. So if we look at the way skills are set up here, in this version, or this project, I guess I should say, we had this idea that we would have multiple characters. And so when we come into this screen, the first thing we're met with is like, which character would you like to select? And as you go up and down through them, you see the skills associated with that character, and you are upgrading that character's stats. When you go in and increase luck, which apparently that is not tied to luck, but when you increase these stats, it's modifying it for this Fala character. And when we come back in here and we go into Ward and we upgrade Ward stats, it's modifying it for Ward, and they're each independent. The problem is infinite retries is much simpler than that, in that you only have one character. So if we go over and we take a look at infinite retries, we go into, say, I don't know, Forest 2. We just have one like hero character walking around. And so because of that, I actually like simplified the way that we handled data. The other thing is, in Era, we specifically had it set up so that all the skills gain skill points independently. So the more you used a skill, the more skill points that skill could gain. I've kind of pulled some of the skill point stuff out in infinite retries and instead have pulled in this idea that you gain like a generic increase in skill points for just progressing through the game. Each time you complete a run, you get some points, and those points can be spent on any skill. And so because of that, a lot of the structure of how you gain points and unlock things is different. So I realized I needed to move a lot of the specific things about skills out of core and move them back into each individual folder, so each game could decide how it wanted to handle abilities on its own. So I've pulled out like the ability nodes and the ability specs, which is really what a skill tree is an ability spec. And I've made it so that they can each be independent. And in doing that, I basically had to like rewrite a bunch of logic, and I have it so that, as you just saw, it works in the old project, but I haven't hooked it up so it works in the new project. And that's kind of what I'm stuck on. I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I even begin? So let's start here. So if we look at the skill screen, the skill screen exists here. We have like a backup one. Let's stop running. And let's look at the scene view in 2D. Okay. So we can see that we have copied all of that logic, but we don't need any of the like unit select stuff because we will only ever have one unit. So I've torn all that out. So I guess the first thing I need to validate is I believe I've made copies of every single one of these scripts, and each of them should now point to a version of itself that exists inside of the Infinite Retries folder. So first things first, let's make sure these are all pointing to the right locations. Let's see, going down the level, we have node menu. The node menu is here, and that points to the node menu that's inside of this one. That's great. Let's go back up. We also have the stat background, which has all of the stat component stuff on it. That's all here. So if we take a look at this, where is this located? So this is located in the JRPG. So this is something that I haven't finished copying over. Okay. And I remember why. So let's take a look. Again, I'm just going to keep walking through these things. I'm not even entirely sure that this is going to be followable because it may require too much knowledge about the interworkings of the code base, which I have not done a full breakdown of. But I don't know. We're going to try this. Maybe it's just a background noise stream for some folks. But I find it so helpful to just like rubber duck my way through these problems. So we're going to do that. So a unit exists as like kind of the base piece of like a lot of the content. So if we take a look at a different prefab for not the front end, but design data, content design data. Yeah. Prefabs, and we take a look not at the props but at the characters, and we take a look at the player, specifically this one. We can see that this has a bunch of different components on it. It has like this base state beta, which is like a temporary script I have while working on Infinite Retries to deal with all of the new functionality that I don't know what to do with. And it has like this unit, and then it has like a list of abilities which are associated with it. A lot of these are fine. And then like a lot of this stuff under here is like the actual abilities. Most of these aren't in use. Anything with an X is like no longer, well, not even all the X ones. Most of these are not actually in use. I think the only ones we're actually using right now are these bottom four, but these were a lot of prototype ones. But a unit is kind of like the base structure, and then we have the unit, I think, creates the stats. And the stats is what we want to display. It's not here. Is it part of beta? Is it because it's the fact that I don't have a factory for building this? Yeah. So this thing creates, like, adds a stat component to it in order to have all the different stats associated with this character. But unlike Yeah, so this is a temp way to decide if we're using the Era way of stats or the infinite retries, which I call IT way of stats. Eventually, I believe IT will take over, but keeping backwards compatibility for now. Okay, so this bool drives whether or not this stats class, which is part of the core logic, so it's used by both games, determines whether or not it's done via the backend driven way or the existing way. So the backend driven way, if that's true, it will go to the backend state manager and get the unit state, which is basically just getting this unit state class, which has all the states, the stats in it. This is essentially the same way that it's being stored in the stats class, but being stored somewhere else that's more decoupled from the core components. Okay. So then the reason that we have not rebuilt that component set inside of skills here for this thing, I believe, is because this is working off of like a unit data driver and like has stat components. What is a stat component? Is that, yeah, that's based off a unit. I think the problem is that in Era, we would create a whole unit that existed in like a non-destructible scene in Unity that would always exist and we could access at any time. And we'd have like a whole list of team members that we could grab and work with to be able to say, what skills do you have? What stats do you have? But the way that I've reconstructed things for infinite retries, which may not even be better, but it's the way I've chosen to reconstruct things, is instead all of that data mostly exists or should exist in the unit state instead of having like a generic unit that's not even the real character that just is somewhere with all the data on it. So we're still going to want to show each of the different stats. So like this one points to speed, this one points to luck, magic, defense, whatever the stats are, we're still going to want a like component for driving and displaying that stat on the UI. But I think the problem is these are not going to be using unit as their data driver. They're going to be using unit states, I think. See, this is why I'm stuck, because like, it's not that this is hard per se, it's that it's like an architectural problem. And like, this is not great stream content. I recognize it's not great stream content, but I don't know. I've just been stuck for a while and it feels like I need to try something to get past this. So, okay, here's the thing. Talk it through, Tolly, talk it through. We need this. We need to take a step back. We're trying to rebuild the whole skill screen, which is fair. We need to do that. And we all need to figure out all of this component stuff and make sure it's right. But we're kind of just jumping in and being like, oh, what does this need to be? But let's start from the beginning. So when we open this skill screen, what happens in here? We call info, and we expect that when we open this screen, we're going to get an argument that contains a screen component that is driven by the data unit. And this is because in the old version of Era, the screen before this screen was selecting whether or not you were going to ward or follow. And so you would choose one of those, and depending on what button you selected, we'd send that button through to this next screen. That's not how we're going to open this screen in infinite retries, though. In fact, I believe I want to just have a zoom in here, a open skill screen interact. I kicked the mic stand. I hope that didn't show up on mic. Okay, so this open skill screen, where is that? Open skill screen. This prefab. So this is an ability. This is weird, and I don't want to dig too deep into it. We'll do a whole different stream about abilities, but essentially abilities are just a thing in the world, and we can have abilities that exist on a tile, and an interact tile specifically says, grab this ability prefab, and when you walk up to it, this ability prefab is what will get executed if they push the interact button of R1. So essentially, this ability will happen if you walk up and face this tile. And this thing is that's just a check for if we want to do any intro logic. This is delaying for 0.01 of a second for some reason. This is printing that we're opening the skill screen. This is playing an audio effect to say that we've done a menu select. Okay, so it's just an audio effect. Then we're actually calling screen transition ability effect, which is an ability effect to open a screen, essentially, by this name. Then we wait. Then we print the wait complete. Oh, this is wait for... I'm going to rename this just so it's even clearer. Wait for screen close. So this ability is going to prevent you from doing any other actions or doing anything until the screen closes, which maybe is a bit of a hack, but I think that's going to be fine for now. And then we print that we're done, just as a debug. So this is how we're opening the screen. So what is this ability effect doing? This is adding a sequence step, which is basically just a series of events that can happen. And this is just passing in open screen, and it's passing in open screen ID with null arguments, because this is a generic step and we don't have any arguments that we want to pass through. That's not to say that we can't. We could have this sequence step take arguments that it then proceeds to pass through. Probably not a bad idea, but I don't think that's even what we want to do here, because... well... here's what I'm thinking. Inside of this thing, inside of an ability effect, we often grab information about who we're targeting. So like inside of the damage ability effect, we grab the component in parent or the target to get the attacker or the defender. I think in the situation of a ability that is on a tile being activated by a interact, I think it works a little differently, because we're not going to have... this assumes that this ability exists underneath the unit object, which is not true in this situation. Because yeah, the ability exists under the tile. I'm trying to think if we can get the unit. Like if we perform this ability, if we call this ability here, and we call perform on it, we're going to pass in a list of targets. Where's this targets come from? This is the wrong version. Alright, take a step back. Perform. Let's check references in here. How does an ability get performed in infinite retries? This is a slight problem with having both projects in the same Unity project. It means that it is somewhat tricky to try and figure out where things are happening from. But the upside is that I do like the constraint that I am having to build an engine that operates for 2 different games. It means that I'm always building things in such a way that they're expandable. It slows me down a lot in terms of progress, but I like to think that long term it means that I'll have tools that I can use not just for this game, but for the next game as well. Because we're always building out core in ideally a smart way. Current unit perform ability. Okay. I'm following the trail here. Right trigger is a special way of performing an ability, and this one here doesn't pass in any ability target information. Okay, so if we play in this room, I'm pretty sure we will find that open skill screen oh, it's here. This one that we're looking at. If we look at the character, we insert the right trigger in here, but it actually exists down here. Okay, so the tile generates the ability, which exists on the floor, and it's under the tile. But this has no direct reference to the unit that's triggering it right now. Long term, that's a problem, I think. I need to still perform it as a list. Okay. I think what I want to do is I want to pass in the player as the target, which then means I can get unit from target in here, interacting player. So this is the interacting unit. I've now got that forward here. And I could pass that into the screen transition sequence step as an argument type. But still not what the screen was originally expecting. Like, we take a step all the way back. Let's unpin some of these things here. I don't need this up right now, and I don't need this or this. Okay. This was expecting a screen component that has the unit as its data type. Now, the nice thing is, like I said, I've broken all this stuff out to be separate, so I can modify this. It does not need to work in both Era and Infinite Retries. So I could change this to just be expecting a unit instead of a unit button, essentially. And then everywhere here where it's doing button stored data, which is essentially a unit, it could just pass in the unit directly. Yeah, that would function. So the question here is, how flexible do I want this to be? I see a path forward where I could make it work so that there's a specific unit being passed in, which is the unit that interacted to open the screen. That has flexibility in that... Let's change up the music for a second here. That has power in that if we ever switch which unit you're controlling, when you open the skill screen, you would open the skill screen for the current character you're controlling. I don't plan to ever let you choose to have a different character for this game, though. And instead of passing in this information, I could just, like, do a backend manager dot instance dot get... no, not backend manager, backend state manager. Instance unit, get unit state. And I could just get the unit state. Oh, it clicked. It clicked. So I've been thinking I want to get the unit state and pass the unit state in because I don't want to pass in a unit. But if the unit does exist in the world, it's here. We don't have to use the unit state. There is a character, and that character will have stats initialized here. They will be backend driven, so it'll bypass its internal version and go get the ones from the unit state anyways. The question we have to ask is, does that get set up for the Wisp version of the character, which is the one that we will actually be... We need to go to the Goddess Realm. Which will be the one that will actually be doing the interact, because the open skill screen will not be in a random part of the forest, it will be in this space here. So if we take a look at... Where is it? There. If we take a look at the Wisp version of Hero, which is a different prefab, does this still get its stats initialized? It does. And because right now stats get automatically bypassed to the backend manager, and we assume that there's only one unit, we don't have to modify anything. Okay, I got it. I don't think it's coming across clear on stream, but holy smokes. All right, so what we do here then is this needs to be able to pass in some argument data. So we're going to need to construct a arguments, which is going to be inside of this one. So instead of a poolable object, we're going to just pass in a unit. That unit is going to get passed into here, which will be, I guess, current unit instead of current unit button. And then this will not get stored data, but will just pass itself in as the unit into the skill boxes, into everything. This stuff breaks. Okay, I didn't notice this before. So we can't get a button from it. This was about resetting the previous information. That's fine. Current unit. This is about updating the previous selection on the previous screen. Again, we're not doing that because there is no previous screen. Same thing here. Yeah, this is about screen management stuff. We don't need it. We don't need that. And we don't need to do any of that. Okay. Yeah, because this was on left and right trigger. In fact, we don't need left and right trigger in this version at all because we're not going to be switching between units by hitting left and right trigger. We may still do stuff with this functionality, but for now, let's just clear these out to make things even simpler on ourselves. This I'm going to leave commented out because this is to do with equipping, which I may still want to do something there. But for now, this should pass the information in. So this is now expecting a info of type unit. This will need to pass in that. So we're going to make a new info equal to new info unit passing in the interacting unit. We'll pass that in as a argument. We can look at how the skill screen does that. It does it as an object. So in here, we're just going to pass info. And in here, we're going to expect an object args, which will be equal to null by default. So if we call this from other sources, it will just be nothing. And we'll pass in that null information, and we're just passing it through. Why don't you like that? Because I haven't saved the other file. And I need to modify the constructor. Okay. So what we've done is we've modified it so that when we do an interact, that will call the screen transition ability effect, which through a bit of hookup, we've made it so that now when we interact, we pass the unit that interacted in as the target. We will get that unit from the target as the interacting unit. We will construct a generic info with that, pass that into the screen transition sequence step. That screen transition sequence step will then open the screen with that screen args, which it has no idea what it is in here. It just knows that it's passing it through. And the skill screen specifically will be expecting an info of type unit, which it will then cast out correctly, set a unit, and then everywhere inside of the screen, it will then pass that unit in. And then in all the spots where we want to display stats, it will get that unit's stat information, which will direct it forward to the back end. Holy smokes. All right. Let's fix this. So this is opening a cutscene, and we will expect that it has no arguments for that. I think that's valid in this particular moment. Okay. Let's go grab... I think we're at a point where we can start trying to set all this up to actually do something. Because it's been very theoretical for a long time. Let's go into Infinite Retries, Dungeon Forest 2. We'll grab this interact here. We will go into the Goddess Realm scene. We will add this interact to this tile here. Can I make it so it appears on top? Not easily. Yeah, the scrying pool one overlaps it. That's better. At least you can see there's two objects there now. Next problem. We load into this scene and we immediately go into a cutscene for the intro from boot. Because it's the first time we're entering into the scene. And so it is having a flag set. None of that is needed anymore, and it's causing errors. So how do I bypass the intro cutscene? Something I haven't needed to do yet, but probably should fix right now. So this is happening because where do I even begin with this one? Quest Manager. Oh, that's not the button I wanted to hit. Quest Manager. Cutscene Manager. This is checking if... Yeah, we need to make design data to handle this, but this is checking to see if boot intro is not started, and if that flag is not started and we're in the goddess scene, then it will attempt to play the cutscene for this. How do I bypass this easily? I feel like long term I'll need like some sort of like debug list of bools that I want to set to true or false. Or flags. Okay. On scene load is happening here. For the time being, I'm going to do this because there's a more elaborate system I need to build in order to manage the state of the default state of the world. If I do this, this should be enough for us to load in but not do the whole cutscene. So we'll still see the characters slide down into the world, but they will not start a dialogue. Perfect. And if we come over here, we should get an interact. We do not get an interact. Is that because this version of the player doesn't have right trigger set up? Yeah. If I do this, now it shows up. Okay. That's not hard. We just need to come into here. This was built before I added the interact logic, so this just needs to... Interesting. There's a script I haven't checked in, and I can't modify this. Okay. It looks like it's disabled anyways, so we will delete that for the time being. I will look into that later. I'm going to make a note for that. Okay. Moving forward, abilities. We need to add an interact, so we'll have an empty thing set up for right trigger, which is needed in order for interacts to be functional. Okay, interact is here. Okay, where do we fail now? So we fail on unit get component ability specs, get unlocked ability specs. So we're at a point now where we're trying to populate the buttons in the skill menu. So this should be all the skills available to us. But this failed. Let's debug. If I had to guess before we get here, I'm going to probably say that the ability specs doesn't have any unlocked abilities by default. Delete all breakpoints. That's what I'm looking for. Then we'll re-add. Now we should be able to stop. No? Sometimes that fixes it when Unity's frozen. Okay, well, let's stop the editor. Then attach it. See if that helps it. Nope. Okay, we have access back to the window. Now let's try attaching the debugger. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I haven't actually set up Infinite Retries' unit to actually have any ability specs, aka skill screens or skill trees. So then we have to write some initialization logic. What are we... Weird. I'm sorry, am I hitting the wrong button? Did I not just... It's the same button I was just hitting. Input. UI navigation. Right trigger. Number key or page down. There we go. Okay. Where are we? Somewhere inside the profiler? What is happening? Okay, well, great. This actually shouldn't be getting a null reference. Oh, is it just the unit doesn't have ability specs on it? Is that the problem? Oh, that could be the problem. Wisp. There's a good chance we don't construct ability specs on Infinite Retries versions. Yeah, it looks like no. Let's also... just do this, find references. Yeah, we get it. But I don't think we add it to the unit at any point. If we take a look at ability specs for the JRPG aka this one, which is the same class mostly. Oh, not ability spec, ability specs. Listen, I'm not perfect. Some of these naming schemes are maybe not the best. Yeah, so we have to actually... We have to add the ability spec. We have to give it the unit. And we have to add the default list of ability IDs. As well as any abilities... Let's take a look at the team manager. Yeah, it's just the default ones, because every other one will get constructed and added as we go. Hello, Amorphous, and welcome from the YouTube side. No, it's fine. I'm just trying to figure out some stuff this evening, and jumping on and rubber ducking, like just talking it out, just seemed like the easiest way to get past the brick wall I've been on for a couple weeks. Now that stream setup is good, it's not too bad. So what we're doing is we're essentially trying to get it so that we can open the skill screen the same way that we could in Era of Embers, but in Infinite Retries. But the way that we've constructed units and the way that we're handling backend data is quote-unquote better or different, and I'm trying to solve the problems with that. And what we've just discovered is that the unit does not even construct abilities currently, and by abilities I mean skill trees. Listen, my naming is all over the place sometimes. So let's take another look at the Combat Factory. So inside of Era, so this is how Era constructs a unit. It builds a ability spec. And yeah, so an ability spec is basically just like an ability skill tree, because our abilities have our skill trees inside of each ability. It's a weird naming convention. I wish we had named it other things, but we didn't realize the way that it was going to build out long term. So in here, we want to do add component on, I guess we still need to do game object dot. We're going to want to add the ability spec. We're going to pass in the unit here to initialize. And this is more the problem. So in Era, we had a design data or JSON file that would define what were the starting abilities each unit would have. But Infinite Retries doesn't have that same JSON file. I could make one for it, an identical one. But I think in terms of just getting the screen to just open so I can actually see it and make progress, I think I want to just hard code in something. This is going to grab it from the design data. Let's validate, is this design data going to be, this is in Infinite Retries, so if we go here and go to, this is a generic one. Does that mean that right now Era and Infinite Retries are sharing the same ability design data? So there's a project prefix. So we're grabbing a different JSON file, but they are sharing the same class. Okay. That's probably fine for now, but that just means I need to go look at where we're actually storing the data and see what is an ability we could add. What is an ability we could add? So we're going to not look in scripts. We're going to look in design data, and we're going to look in JSON files, ability design data.